So in this lesson, we're going to look at IELTS Speaking Part 3 and the topic of people. Well, in actual fact, people is not a topic, right? It's a category. Do you remember, or you may know, in Part 2, the questions can be put into different categories. There are questions about people, about things, about places, activities, and events. Here, I want to show you how we can take a category like people and how the exam works going from Part 2 to Part 3. So, in Part 2, if you've got a question about people, you may get questions like describe, famous people, a business person you know, a foreign person, or even people who are very close to you. Describe a creative person, a school teacher, a person you work with, a leader that you like. That could be close or somebody you don't know, right? There are lots of questions about people. So what happens is, whatever the question is, that same topic will come through into Part 3. So if you have a question like, describe a singer that you like, that's a person, right? In Part 2. Part 3, you may get a question like this. How has the way musicians sell their music changed in recent years? So we're talking about people and singers, music, but we're going much wider, talking about the music industry, how they sell their music and changes. Often there's changes between the past, how it will change in the future, the good, the bad, and the ugly, things like that, right? So that's how it progresses. Another example, if in Part 2 you're asked to describe a famous person you admire, a Part 3 question will be looking at people and fame. And you may get a question like this. How will attitudes to famous people change in the future? Okay, so it's looking wider on the topic of fame and people, right? And again, change in the future. So remember, Part 3, it's very often about change in the past, change in the future, what's good, what's bad, advantages, disadvantages, things like that. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is take those two Part 3 questions, right? They are different subtopics, but they are about people. And this will just show you how I approach the answer, a possible structure you can follow, as well as some interesting language you can use. With structure, just a little point, do remember the balance between structure and flow. Because in Part 3, you don't have time to prepare. So having a structure is really difficult to do. I think when you're practicing, like today, it's good to think about structure and maybe take time to structure your answers. But do remember, in the test, you won't have time. So the more you practice it, the more you can automate it. But in the test, you may just go with the flow. You may just start answering, and there's a simple formula, right? You can give your opinion, the reason why, and an example. That opinion, reason, example, simple formula you can follow if you want for Part 3 questions. Okay, so let's take, first of all, let's imagine you've had Part 2, describe a singer that you like. Now we're moving to Part 3 and you're asked a question like this one. How has the way musicians sell their music changed in recent years? Okay, so here's an answer that I might give. Okay, well, I'd say it's changed in a number of ways. First of all, given the reach of the internet, more and more musicians are selling their music online. I mean, gone are the days of just selling albums in shops. Nowadays, most musicians will stream their songs via popular platforms like Spotify. That said, live concerts are still a popular way of promoting their music, although this has faced setbacks due to COVID, but we're slowly seeing live concerts popping up again. Right? Okay, great. So that's a possible answer. Let's have a look then at an analysis of the language that I've used there. Let's look first actually at the structure. So what I've done is to give my opinion, right, I say, well, I'd say. First of all, right? It's a nice connector to introduce my opinion. Then the reason here, well, I've said, first of all, given the reach of the internet, right, because the internet reaches so far, musicians are selling their music online. That's the reason. So sometimes we use because, due to, or here, given, then we have this. Other connectors I've used here, actually, I've moved on and given contradictions, right? So contradictions is where you say one thing and then you say something almost opposite, but it's still good, right? So I've said, gone are the days of selling albums in shops, right? Nowadays, musicians stream their music. That said, contradiction, live concerts are still popular. And then, although, again, giving up another contradiction. Okay, looking at the language here, I'm going to look first at the grammar, because I think a lot of students ask questions about grammar in part 2 and part 3, like which tense should I use? There is no rule for this at all. It depends what you want to say. But notice here in the question, it's the present perfect. How has changed in recent years? It has changed. And I've just copied the present perfect. Well, I'd say it's changed, it has, it's changed in a number of ways, right? In many ways. That's absolutely fine. In fact, it's perfect. And then I go on, you can see, to use the present simple because I'm saying it's changed from the past to now, and now it's like this. So it's most likely I'll be using the present. Are selling, are still, are slowly seeing live concerts popping up. I also used will for habits. Most musicians will stream their songs, meaning they usually stream their songs. It's a nice change. And at the end, I do come back again to present perfect, although this has faced setbacks. So the present perfect is the idea of looking back recent years at activities that have happened and are still happening now. So the setbacks were maybe 2 years ago, last year, last month, and still now. They have faced setbacks. Okay, so that's just giving you some ideas around tense. What about vocabulary? Well, a couple of expressions here. Gone are the days. That means this is no longer true. It no longer happens. So selling albums in shops. Do you remember the vinyl albums that we used to buy? Well, I used to buy when I was a kid. I used to go down the shops and would go through all the albums and pick them out. That's disappeared now, more or less. Gone are the days of doing that. Talk about setbacks. A setback is something, it's a check in progress or a stop in progress. You're trying to advance, and then suddenly you have to stop because something changes. That's a setback. You cannot advance anymore. And then finally, popping up is a lovely colloquial word. To pop up just means to appear, right? All kinds of things are popping up. There are new websites popping up, new shops popping up, appearing, right? Lovely. So that's it. We've looked at the part 3 topic here of music, a singer, and one of the questions. Let's switch now to talking about a different part 2 topic, people and fame. So likewise, imagine in part 2, you've had a question, describe a famous person you admire. And now in part 3, the examiner asks you, how will attitudes to famous people change in the future? This is what I might say. Well, that's really hard to say. I mean, the way I see it, we've already had some significant changes, right, due to the rise of social media, where almost anyone can become famous for absolutely anything, to be honest. I think in future, it's more than likely that we will expect famous people to share even more of their lives with us. We'll probably demand more from them, snippets of their private lives and that, because, well, social media encourages us to do that. Also, I dare say, we will expect them to be even better role models for younger people. But I suspect that's an expectation they will find hard to fulfill. Right, okay, great. So let's have a look. First of all, let's have a look at the structure of my answer here. You may notice, by the way, that I put in lots of other fillers to sound more natural. Things like I mean, right. Absolutely fine. Just gives it a more natural feel. So the structure, again, I give an opinion and then I look at reasons. The opinion, well, I begin with the way I see it. Great, meaning I think. I also have then I think in future or in the future. Both are okay. And then in the last paragraph, also, I dare say, which is great, especially when you're talking about your opinion in the future. It means I think it is probable that something will happen. I dare say we will expect this in the future. Okay, nice ways of giving opinion. And then giving a reason, well, the classics, due to, right? The way I see it, we've already seen some changes due to this. And also because social media encourages us. Okay, simple structure. Again, don't worry too much about the structure, but it's nice to think about this and practice when you're practicing. What about next, grammar? Also, I wanted to highlight the grammar here, because if you look in the question, how will something change in the future? It sounds like I'm going to be using the future tenses. In fact, I begin with the present perfect because this question's really hard, right? I don't have a crystal ball to see into the future. I don't know. But what I can do is say, well, in the past, we have seen this, and now it looks like this, and maybe in the future. And there you've got nice tenses. You've got present perfect, possibly the past, present tense, and future tenses. So this is a great question where you can do all of that. So I begin by saying we have already seen some changes. And then you could use the present. I go straight into the future next. We will probably demand more from them. They will find hard to do this. We will, or it's more than likely that we will, right? That's another connector. It's more than likely. It's very probable that we will. Nice connectors to use. So there's a whole range of tenses we can use here. You probably will never just use one tense, right? What about vocabulary? Let's move on. Useful expressions, simple collocation, significant changes. Instead of important changes, significant changes. Or you can say big changes, right? These are just different collocations to build up your flexibility. A snippet of their private lives. A snippet is an extract. If you ever do Google search, when you do Google search, it gives you a small extract of the page, just a line. That's a snippet. So we want snippets of their private lives. That could be a 2-second video is a snippet of something. Role models, another collocation. Role models are basically the good examples that we set for other people. So you may say, I don't know, that Jack Ma is a great role model for young people around the world who want to be business people. And finally, expectations.